June 13, 1944. Villers-Bocage, Normandy. 1 Tiger War, 5 crew. In approximately 15 minutes, SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann's vehicle destroys 14 tanks, 15 transport vehicles, and 2 anti-tank guns. The British 7th Armoured Division loses an entire armoured column to a single crew in a single engagement. The 5 men who did it were wearing black wool uniforms introduced in 1934, double-breasted, designed to hide grease and oil from daily maintenance and to announce, visually, that the men inside were not Wehrmacht. Their sidearm was selected specifically to fit through a 50-centimeter escape hatch. Their throat microphones pressed against the larynx to transmit voice over a 690-horsepower engine, and one document carried by each of them would later appear in Allied war crimes proceedings. Here is exactly what those 5 men were carrying. The Tiger Warren's escape hatch measured approximately 50 centimeters in diameter. That figure governed every personal weapon in the kit. A man exiting under fire could carry nothing that would not fit through a circle roughly the width of his shoulders. The KAR-98K was not in the Tiger. The hatch diameter told you why. The standard sidearm issued to SS Panzer crews from approximately 1940 onward was the Walther P-38. It weighed 0.96 kilograms. It fired the 9mm parabellum cartridge from an 8-round magazine. Its trigger mechanism was double action. The first pull both cocked and fired the weapon without a preparatory action from the shooter. That specification was not a convenience. It was a doctrinal decision. A crew member emerging through a 50-centimeter hatch from a vehicle that had been hit, possibly with one arm injured, almost certainly moving fast, needed a weapon that functioned in the first second after clearing the hull. Wehrmacht equipment allocation records document the SS Panzer preference for the P-38 over the P-08 Luger on precisely this basis. The Luger required 2 hands. Wittmann's own after-action report from the Villers-Bocage engagement, preserved in SS records, does not mention the personal sidearm. It describes the tactical situation, the targets engaged, and the extraction route. The P-38 was not the weapon the report was written about. It was the weapon the report assumed every crew member had already thought through. The pistol was the last weapon the tank offered. The MP-40 was what the commander carried when he understood the hatch was the last thing he would use the tank for. Tank commanders in SS Panzer units carried the MP-40 in addition to the P-38. The MP-40 weighed 4.03 kilograms unloaded. It fired the same 9mm parabellum cartridge from a 32-round magazine at approximately 500 rounds per minute. Its effective range was 100 to 200 meters. It folded. It fit through the hatch. Allocation was by roll. Not every crew member carried one. Wehrmacht and SS equipment records document it as a commander's weapon, issued for dismounted operations after vehicle loss. The loader, driver, and radio operator carried the P-38. The commander carried what he would need once the tank was irrelevant. The shared 9mm caliber between the MP-40 and the P-38 was documented as deliberate. In an extended dismounted engagement beyond any resupply, a crew member could strip magazines from any weapon in the kit and feed either one. SS Panzer unit doctrine recorded this interchangeability as a logistical consideration for crews operating beyond their support lines. The Tiger I's 88mm gun was effective at 2,000 meters. The crew's personal weapons were effective at 200. The gap between those two figures was not a failure of planning. It was an honest statement about what the crew was for. The tank was the weapon. The personal kit was what remained when it wasn't. The weapons were chosen for survival after the vehicle died. The uniform was chosen for something else entirely. The Schwarz Panzer uniform was introduced in 1934. Double-breasted black wool jacket and trousers, cut short to avoid snagging on tank mechanisms, black to conceal the oil, grease, and hydraulic fluid that daily maintenance deposited on every surface it touched. The color was not camouflage. It was designed to be seen. A Waffen-SS Panzer crew in black standing beside a tiger. I was a deliberate institutional statement. The uniform announced that these men held priority allocation of the vehicle before Wehrmacht panzer units received it. It announced that the SS maintained a separate identity within the German military structure, enforced visually and materially. Wehrmacht field evaluations from the Eastern Front recorded the practical consequence. In mixed infantry armored engagements, SS Panzer crews in black were identifiable priority targets before they reached their vehicles. Allied forces in Normandy documented the same. Encountering SS rather than Wehrmacht markings changed tactical decisions before a shot was fired. In 1943, the black uniform was phased out for frontline crews in favor of field gray. The official rationale was practicality. What the internal record shows is that the war had become too serious for the institution to keep insisting on its own visibility. When the black uniform disappeared from the front line, the institutional claim it made disappeared with it. The uniform announced the institution. The throat microphone was the institution's solution to a problem its own vehicle created. The Kehlkopf microphone pressed against the larynx rather than sitting near the mouth. It picked up vibration from the vocal cords directly, bypassing the ambient noise around it. Inside, a Tiger Y at combat power, that distinction was not technical. It was operational. The Tiger Y's Maybach HL-230 engine produced approximately 88 decibels at the driver's position under sustained load. Standard voice communication between crew positions was not possible. A commander who could not transmit fire orders to his gunner had an 88mm gun that could not be aimed. A radio operator who could not hear the net had a vehicle that was tactically isolated regardless of its armor. The throat microphone was the solution to a coordination problem the Tiger's specifications could not solve for themselves. Without it, the Tiger Y was 5 men in a very loud box. U.S. Army Signal Corps technical assessments of captured German armored vehicles documented the throat microphone system in detail after 1944, noting that the intercom discipline it enabled was a primary factor in the coordination efficiency of SS Panzer crews compared to Allied equivalents operating with conventional headset systems in similar noise environments. The throat mic kept the crew fighting as long as the vehicle was running. What happened when it stopped running is in the breakdown records, and those records are the part of the Tiger Y's history most accounts skip entirely. In Normandy, in the summer of 1944, more Tiger Is were lost to mechanical failure than to Allied anti-tank fire. U.S. Army after-action reports from the Normandy campaign documented the pattern specifically. Maybach HL-230 engine overheating under sustained load, final drive failures, immobilizing vehicles without warning, running gear, and suspension breakdowns that exceeded field repair capability. A Tiger Y that could not be repaired had to be abandoned or destroyed to prevent capture. Many were. Each Tiger Eye crew carried the standard maintenance toolkit, wrenches, track tools, tow cables, and was responsible for first-line repair in the field. The vehicle's maximum road range was 140 kilometers. Operating beyond resupply meant a crew would eventually be fighting on foot, regardless of what happened in combat. The kit designed for vehicle loss was not an exceptional contingency. It was a calculated frequency. A crew member abandoning a mechanically failed Tiger near Falaise in August 1944 exited through a 50-centimeter hatch, took the P-38 and the documents from his breast pocket, and walked toward the German lines. The toolkit stayed with the vehicle. This sequence, documented in multiple U.S. Army after-action reports describing abandoned Tiger is found intact or partially destroyed by their own crews, was the scenario the personal kit had been assembled for. The crew that walked away from a dead Tiger carried two things: the P-38 and the document in the breast pocket. The document was the more dangerous of the two. Every Waffen-SS Panzer crew member carried a Soldbuch, the small leather-bound paybook stamped with the SS Eagle and his unique service number. It was mandatory at all times, kept in the left breast tunic pocket, always within reach for inspection or interrogation. Inside, pages tracked every weapon issued, every transfer, every leave granted. It was a soldier's legal identity. On the Normandy front, in the summer of 1944, it was something else. On June 7th and 8th, 1944, 1 week before Wittmann's engagement at Villers-Bocage, soldiers of the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend executed 18 Canadian prisoners of war at Ardennes Abbey outside Caen. Across the following days, killings attributed to the 12th SS Panzer Division totaled at least 156 Canadian prisoners across multiple locations in Normandy. Post-war proceedings against SS Brigadeführer Kurt Meyer, commanding the division, produced testimony and documentary evidence linking the orders to his command. Meyer was convicted of war crimes in 1945. The Soldbuch that identified his soldiers as members of the 12th SS Panzer Division placed them at those locations under those orders on those dates. Allied interrogation records from Falaise prisoners in August 1944 document that captured SS personnel were specifically asked to produce their Soldbuch before any other identification, confirming the document's status as the primary legal identifier in Allied processing of SS captives. The Soldbuch identified who a man was. The insignia on his collar identified what organization had given him his orders. Together, they were what the Normandy prosecution built its case around. The SS collar insignia worn by Waffen-SS Panzer crews consisted of SS runes on the right collar tab and the Totenkopf, the death's head, on the left. The 3rd SS Panzer Division carried it not only on their uniforms, but on their vehicle markings. The insignia was stamped, painted, and worn into every engagement the division fought. Allied after-action reports from Normandy documented a consistent pattern, identifying SS rather than Wehrmacht unit markings changed tactical behavior before an engagement began. More fire, less restraint in the treatment of personnel encountered near vehicles. The insignia did tactical work before a shot was fired, and not in the direction the institution had intended. The death's head was not decorative. It was the institution's statement about what it considered itself to be. Allied intelligence noted that statement and adjusted accordingly. U.S. Army intelligence summaries from Normandy, 1944, declassified and available in the National Archives, document the specific behavioral change in Allied units when SS unit identification was confirmed. The summary language is institutional and precise. SS unit contact warranted different tactical assumptions than Wehrmacht unit contact, and unit commanders were briefed accordingly. The insignia declared what the institution intended. One document bound every man who wore it to those intentions in legal terms that outlasted the battlefield by decades. Tucked behind the Soldbuch in the left breast tunic pocket of every Waffen-SS Panzer crew member was a card signed at induction. The SS Oath card bound each man personally to Adolf Hitler, not to Germany, not to the Wehrmacht, not to the German state. It carried the man's signature as a legal act. The wording left no ambiguity. At Nuremberg, the SS oath structure was cited as evidence of willing membership in a criminal organization. The International Military Tribunal's judgment on the SS, delivered in October 1946, held that the oath's personal pledge to Hitler, rather than to a military institution, was the mechanism by which each man's service was legally connected to every order that service produced, including orders issued by an organization the tribunal had declared criminal. On December 17, 1944, at the Baugnez crossroads near Malmedy, Belgium, SS troops from Kampfgruppe Piper, part of the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte, executed approximately 84 American prisoners of war in a field. The subsequent U.S. military tribunal at Dachau tried 73 SS personnel. 43 were sentenced to death. The prosecution drew directly on the Nuremberg findings on the SS oath. The personal pledge bound each man not to military orders, in the conventional sense, but to the personal authority of the man who gave them. The P-38 that fit through the hatch, the black uniform that announced them, the Soldbuch that identified them, the oath card that bound them, each item in the kit was evidence of the same institutional decision made before the war began about what the SS intended to be. If you can name a piece of personal military kit that appeared as evidence in a war crimes trial, put it in the comments. Subscribe. This channel covers the hardware, the doctrine, and the decisions behind both.